you? I'm making the video live on YouTube. So yeah, one moment.
Okay, cool.
I have sent a message to the rest of our speakers. Kau fokus pada kerjaanmu. Hi, hi. Oh, okay, sorry. It's the YouTube video ya. Fokus kerjaanmu, bro. Tolong dulu. Okay. So live here. Okay, let's start. Okay, I have advertised, re-advertised or resend the information. Bang, matikan dulu bang. To all the MMT groups I'm in. Cuman udah dikasih abang hilang, mana lagi tuh dikasih lagi lah. So it's 7:30 already. Udah, kan connect. So suaranya bang. Let's start. Bang, suaranya bang. Nggak bisa dengar di sini bergema. Karena di sini kena dia. One moment ya. Headset lah bang. Atau jauh bang. Dia bergema ke sini bang. Nggak, kau pakai headset. Kau penting. Okay. Buddy, can you hear me, buddy? Can you hear me? Your microphone is still on mute, so I can't.
Yes, I can.
All right. So the article,
yeah,
the one that we are discussing, one of them is apparently written by South Africans. One of them, one of the author, and the other is perhaps by a Turkish or both South African. I don't know. Anyway, if you look on Twitter, okay. Have you read this article, by the way?
I read it when it came out. Well, I think it was when it came out a couple of weeks ago. I haven't read it recently, but
1 week ago.
Yeah, it was like a week ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember it's just, but I haven't really got the details exactly. But I'm happy to discuss any points that you bring up about the article.
In that case, I will present first because I will talk about the article.
Okay.
Right. So here, yeah, we have Adam Abu Bakar, one of the authors, and we also have Esra. Let's see, yeah. All right. 23. One moment. What's the name of the author? Esra, yeah? All right, let's see here. Never mind then. All right. Here. Esra Gurlu, yeah? It's a Turkish name, I think. All right, so let's start with my presentation. I have shared my screen. There are four of us supposed to present today. First, myself, titled Constitutional Microeconomics, and followed by you, I guess, since you're here, titled A New Perspective on the South African Economy. So as you might notice that we have no MMT included in our title. So really we are using MMT not as the one size fit all, yeah. We are contextualizing MMT to our context, to our needs. And later, Andrés, if I'm not mistaken, to pronounce his name, is going to present about, in general, the modern money movement, and to answer any questions, any queries that might arise here. He's representing both both United States and Colombia, I think, where he's from. And Anas, of course, on the relevance of MMT and job guarantee in Malaysia. So we have planned this webinar for a long time, and to answer to the or to follow up or to respond to other audience who did not get to see our previous webinars because they said that the information were broadcast too short. I have broadcasted the information for this webinar since a few weeks ago, since we first agreed that we're going to have this. Andres agreed, you agreed, and Anas agreed. And 3 days ago, I have broadcasted the information also in all the MMT groups. So let's see. Here we have actually we are three people here, yeah? Surya, myself, then Afrin, my wife, and Sohibul, a friend, who came up with this idea, constitutional macroeconomics. And one of the main elements of the constitutional macroeconomics is job guarantee and basic income. Indonesian job guarantee and basic income. Why? Both, because the Indonesian constitution mandates both policies in its Article 27, Clause 2. So this is me and my wife. This is what we have done. We have actually translated the macro textbook by Mitchell, Ray, and Watts in Indonesian, which can be found here, yeah? s.id/macroeconomy, Indonesian pronunciation. And we have done a lot others. Writing original articles, and hunting elites, mayors, governors, and even ministers, former ministers, and all that. Yeah. So let's go into the article because I think it provides a good springboard. The article is actually a summary or a popular version of this scholarly paper can be found here, yeah. And in the scholarly abstract, you can see that Abu Bakr and Ugurlu stated that two central questions on MMT and development policy: whether MMT policies ought to be implemented in low and middle income economies, so whether it ought to be implemented, and secondly, whether it can be implemented. And they say that developing countries concerns structural transformation rather than general aggregate demand sufficiency. So because of that, they say that even if MMT had the correct diagnosis of the principal growth challenge faced by developing countries, its cheap policy recommendations would likely be counterproductive if implemented outside of select advanced economies. And there are, to my knowledge, two chief policy recommendations of MMT, at least two, yeah. One is job guarantee, the other is permanent zero interest rate policy. So I don't. This article, I think, does not discuss the PZIRP, but discusses the first one, job guarantee. So let's dissect this article briefly. So first of all, developing countries, I think I myself take issue with the term developing country. When I first read this article, I searched for the keyword, the title of the article, and I input it into Twitter search. And in all the replies, I said that it is very sad. I feel very sad upon reading this article because they miss a lot of literatures. So not only MMT literatures, but also popular and scholarly literature. So this is from the popular literature, yeah. This is 2016, yeah, Quartz. The World Bank is eliminating the term developing country from its data vocabulary. So even the mainstream, the institution which pressures developing, or let's say post-colonial country, instead of developing country, I would like to use the term for post-colonial countries. So if you search for the keywords developing country, alternatives to the term developing country, you'll find a lot of other terms are being proposed. But I like to propose the term post-colonial countries. Two branches to that. So post-colonialized countries and post-colonializing countries. And South Africa and Indonesia would fall under the post-colonialized countries, yeah? So the World Bank is eliminating the term developing country. Instead, the World Bank choose high income, middle income, and low income, if I'm not mistaken, yeah? Let's see. Yeah, see here. Low income, middle income, and high income countries. For example, it says that China, Bolivia, and Eritrea, which fall in three different income groups, are all lumped together as developing. So that's why the term developing is problematic for the World Bank. And since 2016, reported by this paper, they have ceased to use that. Indonesia at the moment lies within the high income country, more than 4,000 US dollar GDP per capita, if I'm not mistaken, that's the criteria. So we are ironically high income country, yeah? That's problematic also, that term, high income. That's why we are high income, but that term doesn't tell us anything. In terms of structural transformation, as alluded by the author, the article's author in the scholarly abstract, we are yet to be industrialized. So we are yet to be industrialized or re-industrialized, and yet we are high income. So that's why I prefer the factual, not only papers, not only popular articles, not only blogs, not only tweets, not only Facebook posts, yeah, but also videos, because the MMT community all over the world has a lot of videos, and very informative videos which gathers all the MMT experts. And here you can see, if you look at this panel, there are 4 presenters. The first is Jan Kregel, and then Yan Yang and Warren Mosler and Fadel Kabub. And the first presenter, I don't want to play this now because it will disrupt our presentation. The first presenter, Jan Kregel, said that actually the term developing and develop is also not accurate because he says, I think in this presentation, even the US are now developing. Even developed countries, they still need to continuously develop their country. So for example, crumbling infrastructures need to be built, and then technological advancement is always something new. That's why a country cannot claim itself to be permanently developed. So all countries are actually developing countries, including so-called industrialized and advanced or high-income countries, such as those found in Western Europe, in North America, in Australia, New Zealand, and all that. So that's the first thing, yeah? That's why I say I think they need to really read into the literature more. So they are saying that they're having a critical engagement with MMT from a developing country perspective. So we are now engaging with their critical engagement, but we are not limited to their article. We have our own materials, we have our own perspective, which we are going to present later, each of us, including me. Yeah? So they say that little attempt to qualify key arguments. So this is also, you can see here, Eric Taimoy, one of the MMT scholarly circle, one of the academic in the MMT scholarly circle, even says that these are 7 MMT myths that you can find. Yeah? 1, MMT ignores Minskian financial stability. 2, MMT ignores capital controls. 3, MMT only applies to the US. 4, MMT says nothing about developing economics. So even our MMT scholar also still uses the term developing. Yeah. 5, MMT doesn't recognize there can be trade-offs. 6, MMT says deficits don't matter. So these are all myths which Warren Mosler, the first to reply there. He has a white paper. So yeah, there's a lot of. One moment, please. Let me. Okay, never mind. So let's go more. Let's. Yeah. Let me do this first. Yeah. More make co-host. Yeah. Okay. Long-run growth challenge faced by these countries concerns structural transformation. There is the transition to an industrial economy. The policy recommendations emphasized by MMT might be counterproductive if implemented outside of select advanced economies. If that is the case, then Ugurlu and Abu Bakar might want to consult with the Indonesian government, who has engaged several MMT scholars, scientists, experts, or MMT adjacent, MMT friendly, MMT informed experts in their paper, in their recommendation, in their book. This is a book, 300 pages long, yeah, titled Policies to Support the Development of Indonesia's Manufacturing Sector During 2020 and to 2024, Joint Asian Development Bank and Bappenas report. Bappenas is a ministry, Indonesian Ministry for National Planning. And you can download this report, it's free. And here you can see one of the consultants, main consultant for the third part, or for the macroeconomics sector, prominent MMT expert who is a professor in University of Missouri, Kansas City, which is also a prominent MMT. We call that MMT centers, yeah, and also a research scholar at the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, a prominent MMT informed institution. So you can see that this report, you can see in the abstract, yeah, that one moment. Okay, yeah, forward, yeah. No, this is by the ADB. This is by our minister. Now he is not here. Another ministry equally important, yeah. He says that, moreover, industrial policy will not be effective if it's treated as a sectoral policy. A consistent macroeconomic policy framework is needed to support the development of the manufacturing sector. Indonesia needs to develop a more integrated policy. Given our current account deficit, a reduction in the budget deficit puts pressure on the financial balance of the private sector. A well-designed macroeconomic policy mix is needed to reduce the financial burden of growth on the firm sector without sacrificing faster growth. So one of the MMT main finding is, in terms of sectoral balance, the balances of a country can roughly be divided into three, which is the government balance, the private sector balance, and the foreign balance or the external sector balance. So if you have a current account deficit, either the private sector needs to be in deficit, or the government sector, the public sector needs to be in deficit. And if you have the private sector in deficit, then you increase your financial fragility. But if you have the government sector in deficit, it's fine, because the government is the creator of their own currency, and up to the full utilization of real resources, you would not have any problems. In fact, the full utilization of resources would be shown, would be roughly shown. There's some complications here, there's some details in terms of inflation. So that's for later. And here, so this is what I'm very, very sad about, because they criticize Ugurlu and Abu Bakar criticize the advocacy for the state fulfilling the role of employer of last resort as a means to achieve a full employment objective. Countless dissertations, no, countless papers.
Shut the fuck up,
tweets,
Jalapeno.
blog posts.
Shut the fuck up, Jalapeno. What the fuck? We have a Malteser right here. Fuck you, Jalapeno. Fuck you, Malteser. Fuck all of you, Libguineas. Fuck your school and fuck your shit.
Sorry, I got cut off because of the internet connection. One moment, yeah. So if you input job guarantee here, here, the first result you can see by Michael J. Murray and Matthew
Jalapeno. Jalapeno. Fuck you, Jalapeno. Fuck you. Suck my nuts. Suck my fat cock. Stop eating.
Sorry.
Surya, this is Ethan. That's making
moment,
those
yeah?
comments.
Who's this?
Fuck you, Buddy Wells. You're a
Who's
snitch. You're a snitch, buddy. Buddy, you're a fucking
man,
snitch. I hate you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I have removed him, yeah? Please. So I'm very sorry for that. Yeah. So here we have the first entry, employment guarantee schemes, job creation and policy in developing countries and emerging markets. So apparently the authors does not bother to read all this literature. That's why, and this is they are editors. So this book has a lot of authors, which shows how job guarantee has been implemented, is relevant, and should be implemented by developing countries. And you can see also, uh, again by them, yeah, job guarantee and monetary. Okay, so I can immediately show you that job guarantee, there are lots of literature which shows that it is actually one of the best policies for developing, I'm sorry, for post-colonialized countries. And so the main issue here lies in the conflation of cyclical and structural unemployment. There are lots of papers which highlights in detail, describes in details, lots of blog posts describes in details about this also. Because I have lots more to present, I won't discuss this, perhaps the others, or later we can discuss this, yeah? So how to raise the rate of investment over the long term rather than smoothing out shorter term fluctuations in economic activity? I think this is not a contradictory statement, yeah, to MMT. And sustained prolonged periods of rapid capital accumulation might require curtailing certain types of current consumption to create space for a high investment share of output. Serious political economic questions for growth strategy in developing countries where inequalities and absolute poverty are often pronounced. Reduce luxury consumption through progressive taxation. So all of these are addressed by MMT. Taxation is slightly tricky, and later I think we'll discuss about taxation. Buddy, I think, has his own blog post, yeah, article on taxation, which he can share later. So in terms of monetary sovereignty, they say that post-colonialized countries have limited monetary sovereignty because of the US dollar dominating the international monetary system. And the inability for developing, for post-colonialized countries, or I'm just going to use developing because they use developing, yeah. I'm telling what they are telling us. So the inability of developing countries' currency to perform international to provide liquidity in the international market for the countries suggests that most developing nations.
Johnny Sins, what are you doing here?
Sorry. A moment, yeah, we have. Okay, so
It was iPhone.
Okay, one moment, yeah. So because the developing countries' currency are not used for international transactions, therefore they have limited monetary sovereignty. So, there are several implications for inflation and external debt financing, particularly if there is heavy reliance on imports of key intermediate goods and high level of foreign borrowing by the private sector, as well as absence of capital controls. I'm sorry. Let me, one moment, yeah. Let me change the system to waiting room. One moment, please.
Good morning, teacher.
So previously, due to the suggestions of many, I removed I allowed the Zoom to become more, okay. So, all right. Okay. So let's continue, yeah? Please, pay attention, yeah? Okay. But this is precisely what MMT is advocating. MMT is a lens to see the strength and weakness of a particular country's monetary sovereignty. So there are several recommendations, in fact, put forward by MMT scholars. First, you need to see where does your monetary sovereignty lie.
Can you
And
repeat that? I couldn't hear you. Can you repeat that, please?
Okay, let me repeat it. So MMT is the
Please
lens.
speak.
That's what I.
Man, you know the Kelvaknin, man. You know the Kelvaknin because I.
Okay, seems that we have a lot of. Right. Okay, so I will repeat one more time. MMT is a lens to see the position of any country in the monetary sovereignty spectrum. So if a country relies on imports, that means because the currency cannot be used to pay.
Excuse me. Can you repeat it? I can't hear you. You're very loud.
Perhaps, let me go to another place here.
I'm hearing you fine, Surya.
All right. So
Surya, I'm hearing you fine. It's just, that's not, it's, I think it's people just causing.
before we proceed, buddy, so that we are not disturbed, perhaps we can. So have we removed Phil? Yeah, don't. Okay, why are they? Let me see again, yeah. One moment, yeah. I'm changing again, yeah. Let me see. Don't admit, Phil. Don't admit anymore. All right. Don't admit, yeah. Accept the speakers. And Indonesians. So apparently, some of our friends in South Africa likes to play with the Zoom seminars. This is the first time actually we have this problem. I apologize. So I have strengthened the security system. I've introduced the waiting room, and I've instructed my co-host not to admit suspicious participants. So let me continue, yeah? I think that point we're going to continue later. I'm just going to go into the next point. Yeah. So let me share my screen. So MMT policies can put developing country governments in a position to choose between issuing domestic currency to finance necessary imports or preventing the exchange rate from collapsing. In essence, developing countries design their fiscal and monetary policies under the threat of capital flight, which results in the adoption of policies that are not completely autonomous. This suggests that the constraints on policy choices are not always purely political and self-imposed, as argued by MMT. I'm not sure this is a criticism because this is the reality. Pardon? Okay. A moment. Okay. Yes. Sorry. Okay. So I think this is not really a criticism, but a caution that needs to be taken by developing countries, and a lot of them, including Indonesia, especially Indonesia, are doing
Brother,
this.
open Pornhub.
And later we're going to discuss this more. Yeah. So again, I'm not sure if this is a criticism. Yeah. Importantly, recognizing the structural limits to fiscal and monetary space in developing countries does not preclude an active role for the state. In our view, a more complete approach to state intervention in developing countries ought to focus on how to conduct trade and industrial policies that stimulate industrial activity. So MMT is saying, no matter what's a particular country's position in terms of monetary sovereignty, they can always, these two things, it's not antithetical to each other. They can do the job guarantee to deal with the people in the bottom of the ladder, bottom of the economic ladder, and they can also do industrial policies to do a structural transformation of their industries to create products and services which can be exported or which can be used by other countries. So this is not really in opposition. As you can see, Indonesia has recognized, yeah, they have an industrial policy which is MMT informed, and they have a policy of at the moment. At the moment, I would say it's quasi job guarantee. So they have a pre-employment card in which the unemployed are given a salary for training, and it is hoped by the training they can increase their skills and afterwards can enter the job market. That's why I say it's quasi. Whereas the MMT approach says that anyone able and willing to work cannot find work in the market, they should be able to approach the state and ask for jobs. Yeah. So let me show you another similar article. Yeah, but this is really
Brother, open XXX.
Why? As a Khalifa, remove. Yeah.
Okay, Ben, choose. Why? No.
Okay. So this is an article by Rabobank in July 2020 by Hugo Erken, Michael Avery, and Eric John von Harn, which says that only 6 or 7 countries in the world are able to implement MMT. So they're saying that only current account surplus countries, especially current account surplus countries, they will have no problem in implementing MMT policies. So, but if you read carefully here, you can see that they actually, similar to the previous paper, advocates and here, sorry. Here, see, they actually advocates what MMT scholars, activists, community are advocating for post-colonialized countries. Yeah, you see, a key point to stress is that all the countries flagged as MMT candidates are net exporters, but we can't all be net exporters. Crucially, however, see the language, all countries can try to shift their economic structure in that direction, thus allowing them to take MMT treatment if they so choose. So, like the previous article, this article also conflates MMT as a lens and NMT as something to be implemented. MMT is short for modern monetary theory. So it's a lens to see, as I said, the position of a particular country in monetary sovereignty, and with that knowledge, they can aim towards increasing their monetary sovereignty by shifting the economic structure towards activities that can increase their monetary sovereignty. So so how can this be done? Here's a few examples. Boost infrastructure investment, local input requirements. Buddy has written on this a lot. Boost R&D, research and development to move up the value chain. Use tariffs to cement supply chains to increase industrial muscle and boost domestic corporate profitability. So Buddy has also compared South African industry with Chinese industry. Yeah, the Chinese industry, state-owned companies, they seem to lose a lot of money.
Teacher.
But because the money is spent locally within the economy, so it's actually beneficial from a macro perspective, from a really consolidated perspective. Raise household incomes while encouraging domestic consumption. Again, job guarantee and in Indonesia, basic income, these two policies are the best means to raise household incomes and encouraging domestic consumption, because when people have money, whether through work or job guarantee or basic income, they can then consume, yeah? And capital controls to keep MMT funds ring-fenced. So you can see all of this have been advocated by MMT scholars, experts, activists, scientists, yeah? And in terms of current account surplus is not necessarily does not necessarily mean the country is always in a position of advantage. Yeah? So we hear a lot about exorbitant privilege. Yeah? The fact that the U.S. runs a current account deficit, the fact that the U.S. can run permanent current account deficit because their currency is being used as international means of payment. So you can see it like this: a country, they can do these two things. Yeah, a country's population, they can do these two things: produce and consume. So a current account deficit means that the country is importing much more than exporting, which is the case for the US. So what happens when you import? When you import, it means that the country, the US, they do not produce the things, the services that they are importing. Other countries produce that. So in the US case, China. So what happened when they are not in production? Meaning their manufacturing capacity, anything that is necessary for production is not in that particular country. Even if it were before, like the US was a massively industrialized country in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s, the aftermath of war. They were no longer so because the centers for manufacturing has moved to outside of the US. So that is not an advantage. Even if the US has dollar as international currency, even if they are able to import, even if they are able to finance the current account deficit, that does not bode well to their population because they are not participating in the production. So lots of unemployment. So this is Michael Pettis. He says that the US should rethink their exorbitant privilege as an exorbitant burden actually. Yeah. So this is very interesting, and it is not always. It is not only the case for the U.S. It is also the case for China. So here, Michael Pettis again, he has written this called MMT Heaven and MMT Hell for Chinese investment and US fiscal spending. So the rule is very simple. He has these three, not this one, here. So whether China or the US or South Africa or Indonesia or any country in the world has these three options. You know, basically all these countries with central banks that create the currencies, they can do these three things. Yeah, they can give money to the rich, they can give money to the poor, or they can build more infrastructure. So only if the giving money to the rich are used to deal with supply side constraints, then you can get an MMT heaven. Only when you give money to the poor to deal with demand side constraints, then you can get MMT heaven. Only if you build the infrastructure and it becomes productive, then you can get MMT heaven. Otherwise, you get MMT hell, which is actually now the state that we are in. Yeah, the U.S. are using the knowledge of MMT.
Fuck you, fat fuck, nigger, 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 nigger.
Okay, the U.S. is using the ability, the knowledge of MMT to create currency to engage or to fund their military industry, their military industrial complex. You know, but there is also there are a lot of perspectives on that, whether the U.S. is a provider of global security or not. Yeah, so. You can read this later, yeah. The same case in China, yeah. Michael Pettis has shown that the Chinese at the moment they are facing a dilemma whether to continue their previous policies, which seems that the Chinese central bank, you know, create so-called easy money and create booms in real estate. They are not really giving money to the rich to deal with the supply side, yeah, but for speculative investments in real estate and all that. So they are facing a problem, and there is a Chinese scholar in the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity, Vincent Huang. Yeah, he said that the U.S. not the U.S. I'm sorry, China should create a policy of job guarantee to deal with the 25 million urban unemployed. You can look at. I will show you that paper later also. So really, even for China, job guarantee is useful. And here, in terms of use and abuse of MMT, Michael Hudson, Dick Bessemer, Steve Keen, and Sabri Onchu, again, really, with the knowledge of MMT, the US and China, the two large countries in the world, know they should use it instead of abuse it. How do they abuse it? They explain it here, and what is needed is for the citizens of these respective countries, of our countries also, to know that the knowledge of MMT can be used and abused, and to warn or to not elect again, not vote again, to outvote those politicians who knows MMT, or they don't know MMT but they abuse the ability of their own countries to create currency. And okay, this is our live streaming. I think that's it for me. And I think now we can go to Buddy, yeah, who will share his perspective on South Africa. Thank you very much. Over to you, Buddy.
Thanks, Surya. Yeah, that was interesting. Just sorry about those comments that you were getting from people. It must be quite hard to talk while you've been interrupted like that.
Yeah,
I apologize if
I'm very shocked because this is the first time I've experienced such things.
yeah. Yeah, I apologize if any of that was coming from South Africans. Yeah, what can you do? I think maybe just keep an eye on who's on the meeting and making comments, and just remove them. Yeah, so I would like to just approach this from a different perspective. You know, as I've said before, I don't really consider myself to be strictly MMT. I do find that the MMT explanation on how monetary systems works seems to be the most accurate. And so I've really learned a lot from the MMT scholars and their writing. My perspective on this, the approach that I wanted to take was how our monetary system perpetuates colonialism, because that's the topic under discussion. You know, the paper that you mentioned, written, co-authored by Adam Abu Bakr. I read it a week ago, so I don't remember exactly the precise details. You did go through a little bit. I remember when I read it though, that it's my criticisms of that paper were the same criticisms that I presented to Adam on Twitter a couple of weeks before that, where I just asked him some basic questions as to why South Africa wouldn't be able to reduce interest rates that the government pays by using the South African Reserve Bank to fund it, to fund cheaper interest rates for government. And his response was to block me. So that's the kind of there's no real discussion about the real things going on and what we can do. It's more just what I find amongst South African economists is that they're more prone to just blocking you, or and not really discussing what's going on. So okay, let me get on to my speech. So how our monetary system perpetuates colonialism. So I start with this. It's a quote of a book. He says, he saw a baby elephant tied to a post with a steel chain. The baby ripped and scratched and tried to get free, but the chain wouldn't break. Then he saw a grown elephant tied to a post with nothing but a little piece of rope. He asked his mother how the little piece of rope held the big elephant in place. And she explained, they chain the babies until they give up. The elephants think that the little piece of rope is still a chain. And that for me kind of explains how, how colonialism is perpetuated through the monetary system. It's more kind of, it's done so through belief systems and value systems that aren't really based on any kind of fact. It's based on past kind of experiences and illusion. So I'll just try and unpack that a little bit as we go along. So one of the ways that I see, when I analyze economics in the world, I notice that there seem to be two sets of unwritten rules. There was one set of rules for the government and central banks of rich, developed, excuse me, Surya, for using the word developed and developing. I had no idea that you were against those terms. But when I use those terms, please forgive me. So there's one set of rules for the governments and central banks of rich developed nations like the US, UK, EU, and Japan, etc. And there's another set of rules for the governments and central banks of poorer developing nations like South Africa. And both sets of rules benefit the developed rich nations. I'll get on to explaining some of those later, but here's a graph of total debt.
You can take your time because our two other speakers haven't joined us, so you can take your time. Don't worry.
Okay, cool. So here's a graph of total debt of countries in the world from last year. So obviously it's got a bit, all those debts have increased with the COVID virus, but this is where we were last year. So if you look at South Africa, South African debt to GDP last year was at 124%. That's including public, household, and corporate debt. And then as you start looking towards the right, you see the more developed nations, United States at 252%, China was around about the same level. France near 3%, all the European countries there near 300%. Japan 380, I think. So if you were to read the economists in South Africa and what's written in the press and stuff, you'd think that South African debt was way more than these countries like the UK or Japan or wherever. And in actual fact, our debt is much less. The problem that we're facing in South Africa is high interest payments for that debt. So even though we're borrowing less, because we're paying 9% on our 9.5% on our 10-year bonds, and we end up paying more percentage of GDP on interest payments than these other countries that are paying lower interest for much more debt. And a lot of that has to do with how the central banks approach, whether or not they are driving the interest rates down in those nations. And this is one of the things that I see with there's two different sets of rules, and both of them benefit the developed nations. One, in developed nations, the central banks finance their states at low interest rates, and developing nations, central banks are not allowed because there's no rules really that stop them from doing it. It's just we kind of told it's that rope around the elephant's leg. We can't finance the state even if their own legislation allows it, which makes the state dependent on borrowing from the private sector and foreign sector for credit at high interest rates. So you end up paying high interest rates to borrow because you're not going to use your central bank which has control over your local domestic interest rates in your sovereign currency. So you purposefully choose to pay more interest rates to foreign investors for credit that they are issuing at that they are getting at 0% from their central banks that are issuing currency by the trillion at 0%. So it's a policy choice that we're making. So while South African inflation is below target and cost push, not demand pulled, and demand, employment, and growth is too low, the Treasury of South Africa can add needed demand, employment, and growth, and reduce costs by reducing taxes and increasing deficit spending. So you can add demand, employment, and growth, and reduce costs by reducing taxes and increasing spending. funded by lower interest rate loans from the South African Reserve Bank. And this is the question that I asked, Adam Abu Bakr, who wrote that paper. I was asking him why can't government borrow? I understand that there's a certain amount of money that you need to fund a balance of payment deficit, but when it comes to your government budget deficit, you don't need foreign capital for that. So why are you paying high interest rates on your budget deficit? And that's when I got blocked. So let me just take these pictures out of the way. The threats of capital flight and hyperinflation is used to justify the state's reliance on the private sector for loans at higher interest rates. So this is one of the points that they made in the paper, is that, capital flight is the big bogeyman, and you always hear stories about Zimbabwe and Venezuela when you bring up the idea of the central bank funding the state. But the unnecessary high interest rates paid by the state are inflationary, as they add to the cost push in terms of taxes and state-owned enterprise levies like electricity prices, and the payment of interest rates by the state to the private sector and the foreign sector increases the money supply, which is inflationary. So central banks can reduce wasteful expenditure by the state by reducing unnecessarily high interest charges on state debt. So, if you're looking at, because wasteful expenditure by the government is inflationary, that's obvious. I mean, you're spending money into the economy, and you're getting less return from it in terms of local goods and services produced. So when the state pays high interest on its debt, you're ending up with you're creating inflation. So you can actually reduce that inflation by reducing unnecessary high interest rates. And this is you asked this question. I asked this question of the author of that paper, and he wouldn't answer the question. He just blocked me. So racism is used to justify prohibiting developed nations from utilizing their central banks, as developed nations do. We're told that African governments are corrupt, they can't be trusted with control over the central banks, and central bank funding of African governments will fund corruption. So, I mean, I think this is part of the whole post-colonialism thing. It's like, you can't do as we do because you're not on our level. You're not, and that's, despite the fact that the QE and the stuff that's happening at the moment in the States by their central banks is funding the elite. I mean, it's going into it's boosting asset prices, and it's not really benefiting people at the bottom as in the way that real quantitative easing could. And so the idea and the idea that having a central bank, not that central bank funding of government will increase corruption, is also very strange, because there's corruption that happens clearly in South Africa. We have a corruption problem, as is quite obvious, and that's happened without any central bank funding. So in order to reduce corruption, you should put in place measures that reduce corruption and make sure that the money goes where it's supposed to go. Whether that money is from the central bank or borrowed from the private sector is not going to make any difference to whether or not there's corruption or not. And unnecessarily high interest rate payments by the state are a form of corruption. because they are wasteful and inflationary and divert spending from the poor and underprivileged to the financiers. So it's all very well to talk about reducing corruption, but if the monetary system that you have in place and the value system that you have in place prevents you from reducing interest rates, then you're actually, that's a form of corruption. Because what you're doing is that you're channeling funds towards the financial sector, towards the foreign investors, and towards rich savers, and away from spending on, and that money could be spent on people that need it in the country, on the productive sectors, that kind of stuff. So it's a form of corruption that the economic policies that allow this continued unnecessarily high interest rate. And the end result is that developing nations pay high interest to import credit that's been issued by the trillion at near 0% interest rates by developed nation central banks. This is like it's such a fundamental issue. Like we've been conned into believing that we can't fund ourselves, but we must pay high interest to import credit that's being issued at 0% by foreign central banks by the trillion. They're printing the money, but we can't do that. That would just that would create inflation. And the funny thing is like if you look at the current, this is the current account for South Africa over the last 4 years or 5 years. It shows that South Africa is actually running a trade surplus. It's been running a trade surplus for the last 4 years. It normally the trade balance for South Africa is normally pretty balanced. We go between, we have a few years in surplus, a few years deficits. It's really kind of minute amounts. But you can see that for the last 4 years we've been, that's the top line there. It's been in surplus, and the balance in goods and services, third from the top. That's when you add the services account. You'll see that's also in surplus. So this is very interesting because South Africa runs a current account deficit, even though we have a surplus in the balance of goods and services. And I think that this makes South Africa a very interesting case because most people think of a current account as being driven by people in the country's importing more goods and services than what it's exporting. And South Africa, even though we export more goods and services than we import, we're still running a current account deficit. And the reason why is, if you look at it, it's the primary income deficit. It's fourth from the top, the green one. If you look at that, you'll see that the majority of our current account deficit is made up of a primary income deficit. And primary income is the payment of profits, interest and dividends to foreign investors for their investments in South Africa. So what we're doing, South Africa has essentially been importing this foreign capital to fund investments in South Africa, or and it's been driving. So let me go back there. It's been driving our current account deficit for years, and that is actually what's been driving up South Africa's debt, because as you know, if you have a current account deficit, what you're going to run short of forex if you don't make up for that deficit by borrowing money on your capital account. So we've basically been increasing our debt to fund the interest payments and the profit payments, dividends and stuff to the people that we're getting money from. And I think this is really interesting. Like, I'm not sure if people actually, if there's another case of a country that's like South Africa. Maybe there is. I find it very fascinating, and it just shows you that this, this is basically we were driving up our debt every year. South Africa's debt is increasing, and it's been driven by payments for credits that's been issued at 0%, and we're paying high interest on it. That's the base. That's how much. Yeah, that's like the epitome of post-colonialism in my mind. Let me carry on. South African Reserve Bank policy is strictly limited to inflation targeting by using only interest rate adjustments as an instrument. So, where other central banks around the world use various policies and instruments to, like the US Fed has been targeting employment. You have central banks targeting growth. I see the US Fed is even considering targeting inequality now. But in South Africa, any calls for policy to be broadened to balancing inflation targeting with targeting growth or full employment are labeled as irresponsible, even though the central banks of developed nations balance growth and employment with reducing inflation. So when this is the other set of rules that we have, that for developed nations they have a set of rules, and for developing nations they have another set of rules. While they can have these central banks that have balanced mandates, developing countries are, we're not allowed to do that, and that's, I find, quite informative. South Africa's policies make our own productive sectors less competitive and viable, resulting in less investment in local production. So because we're paying high interest rates and high taxes as a result, and because of the belief that the government is dependent on the private sector, we end up having taxes that are too high. And this results in less competitive industries because the costs are higher and the demand is lower. So, so there's less investment in local production because if your costs are high and the demand is low, then you're going to have less incentive to invest. These policies make South Africa more dependent on imports of foreign goods and services and foreign investment. And I think this is maybe, the goal behind everything, is that the developed nations don't really want to have competition for their industries. They want to have less competition. And I think the monetary policies of the world are kind of designed to ensure that developing nations' industries don't really develop, so that we are more dependent on the goods and services and capital from foreign nations. And the poverty caused by austerity policies ensures that local goods, services, and assets are sold cheaply to foreign investors. The result is more foreign ownership and more extraction of profits, dividends, and interest. So, because our monetary policies are the interest rates are set too high, and there's no fiscal, there's less fiscal stimulus. That ensures that the local, that locals are poorer and more desperate for money. So then when you're selling your goods and services, you have less of a bargaining position, and you'll sell it for cheaper, and your assets as well. So this all boils down to the post-colonialism thing, where the policies are set up in place in order to shift ownership from locals to the foreign developed nations, because we sell our assets for cheap because we're desperate for money. And the more that we sell to these foreign companies, like, they want us to all the structural adjustment programs that have been recommended to South Africa. A lot of them recommend privatizing our state-owned enterprises, selling them to foreign investors and things like that. And what that will do, will just increase our current account deficit as we pay more to foreign investors, and they extract more profit and dividends and interest. And that will just drive up South African debt. So the excuse that we should reduce debt by selling our assets is actually the opposite. We're going to end up with more debt by doing that. And so the Dictionary of Human Geography uses the definition of colonialism as an enduring relationship of domination and mode of dispossession, usually, or at least initially, between an indigenous or enslaved majority and a minority of interlopers, colonizers, who are convinced of their own superiority, pursue their own interests, and exercise power through a mixture of coercion, persuasion, conflict, and collaboration. And I think that if you had to look at, if you analyze this, what this says that that colonialism is, then you would see that the monetary policy systems that we've put in place and the economic policies that are based on fallacies, they set up this enduring relationship of domination and a mode of dispossession, and they're definitely based on ideas of superiority. If you have gone to any of the Twitter posts, you'll see that there's so much of that kind of superiority kind of thing happening, where a lot of the arguments aren't really based on any kind of fact. They're just based on the idea that, for instance, that African countries can't handle the power of being in control of their own central banks, that kind of stuff. And the South African constitutional mandate is to protect the value of the currency in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth. So even though we have a constitution which actually says that, if you look at it, must protect the value of the currency in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth, which means that it has to protect the value of the currency in ways that are in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth. And things like funding local production, things like funding education for our people, things like funding land reform, to reverse the dispossession that happened during the colonial conquest, to reduce inequality, to reduce poverty, reduce unemployment. All these kind of things are in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth. And and they also protect the value of the currency, because by, for instance, you know, if you had to invest in education or local production, you're increasing the supply of skills and services, which brings down the price of them. You also creating more entrepreneurialism, more productivity, so more local goods, more exports, which strengthens the rand, less imports. All those kind of things are basically part of the constitutional mandate of the South African Reserve Bank. And yet, because of the, I would say, the capture of the ideological capture of the people that are making the policies at South African Reserve Bank, they are limiting their policy, their instruments to just using interest rate adjustments. You know, we could be investing in land reform to make sure that the process of moving ownership of land from the white population of South Africa, which benefited from colonialism and apartheid, to the black population who were dispossessed through colonialism and apartheid. That could be funded by the South African Reserve Bank, and doing so would actually reduce the risk of capital flight and hyperinflation that we saw in Zimbabwe, for instance, where they didn't do that. And there was a, you know, kind of a less structured kind of land reform process that ended up scaring away a lot of capital. There was a lot of capital flight, and the local production of food dropped because there was less there was a drop in investment into local food production and tobacco and stuff. So what ended up happening is that they ended up with hyperinflation because the local production of what they normally export and stuff dropped, and so we can actually, South African Reserve Bank can actually invest in land reform, and it's part of the mandate, if you think about it, to prevent that kind of thing from happening, to prevent hyperinflation, to keep local production strong, to keep local investment into productivity, into local production. You know, that's part of the South African Reserve Bank mandate, and it's not doing that. So I think that's kind of sum up my my little speech on how our monetary system in South Africa is perpetuating post-colonialism. And I'm going to leave you with the picture of this beautiful African elephant as just an image of what you know, we have to break the chain. You know, we're not actually tethered anymore by any kind of rope around our leg or anything like that. It's just a matter of believing that we have the capacity to do that, and rejecting the ideas that perpetuate this colonial system that we have, the monetary system that's perpetuating colonialism. Over to you, Surya.
Thank you very much, buddy. What a very enlightening presentation. My colleague here, Sohibul, has said that he must have your slides, yeah, because he feels very enlightened by your presentation. He feels very energized, you know, because the identification of the problem is first and foremost what is needed before we can solve those problems, yeah? So I guess we can open the I guess we can open the I guess we can open the webinar to question and answer session. I saw Sharon just now. Maybe she's still here. Oh no, she has left. So she raised her hand previously, but I think she has left. So what is perhaps others present can ask their question. Even those Indonesians present can ask their question in Indonesian, or buddy, if you can speak Afrikaans, I'm not sure what the native language, you can ask, you can translate later so that you can converse in English. Yeah. So perhaps from Pak Sohibul, do you have any question before I proceed? I have lots more to present actually. Please. Yeah.
Terima kasih Pak Badi. Saya sangat terkesan dengan pemaparan Anda. Seolah Anda adalah bagian dari negara-negara terjajah yang terus-menerus dijajah hingga hari ini.
Thank you, buddy. I'm very impressed with your presentation, which shows that your country and my country, we are still being colonialized now. So even though we are formally independent, but factually we are still colonialized.
Tapi saya sadar betul bahwa suara Anda adalah suara minoritas yang tidak begitu didengar di dalam konstelasi dunia.
But I realize that your voice is a minority, which have not yet been heard properly, which have not yet been listened to by a lot of people in your own country and in the world.
Hingga hari ini kita tidak punya cara yang efektif untuk menghentikan eksploitasi berlebihan tanpa moral negara-negara kaya terhadap negara-negara miskin.
Until today, we have not yet an effective mechanism to stop the exploitation of post-colonialized countries by post-colonializing countries. Pak Sohibul actually used the term poor countries, exploitation of poor countries by rich countries.
Saya tahu ada lembaga, lebih dari satu, yang level internasional. Secara formal mereka memiliki kewibawaan, tetapi efek dari ucapan dan kebijakan mereka tidak selalu kelihatan di lapangan.
I realize there exist several institutions, international global institutions, which are very influential in terms of what they say and what they recommend. But they haven't been recommending or saying things that benefit these post-colonialized countries.
Globalisasi adalah proyek besar. Dalam berbagai implementasinya, terbukti telah membuat negara-negara lemah menjadi semakin terposisikan sebagai negara termangsa bagi negara-negara pemangsa.
Globalization is a huge project, but the result so far we see that there are victim countries and there are predator countries, and our countries are included in the victim countries.
Kelihatannya istilah seperti persaingan bebas adalah sebuah istilah yang netral, sangat fair, sangat adil, dan sangat sesuai dengan watak manusia. Tetapi dengan keberadaan yang begitu berbeda, kira-kira bagaimana hal itu bisa menjadi harapan bagi negara-negara lemah?
It seems that free trade or all these global policies can be beneficial to post-colonialized countries, but the reality is not. So how can we transform, how can we change, how can we pressure these global institutions, these post-colonializing rich countries to change their policies towards poor post-colonialized countries?
Para pembijaksana di negara-negara kecil seperti Indonesia juga canggung untuk memikirkan sesuatu yang lebih baik bagi negaranya. Saya ambil contoh. Baru-baru ini di Indonesia muncul berita yang mengatakan bahwa Menteri Pertahanan membeli 15 jet tempur bekas dari sebuah negara di Eropa. Tetapi kita tahu adalah sebuah pertanyaan besar. Siapa mau ditakut-takuti dengan 15 jet tempur bekas itu? Cina tentu saja akan anggap enteng, Amerika juga akan anggap enteng. Dan Indonesia tidak punya dasar untuk bermusuhan atau melakukan perang dengan Malaysia, Vietnam, dan negara-negara sekitar itu. Tetapi mungkin ada keterpaksaan untuk membeli pesawat itu atas senario yang tidak kelihatan.
So even the policymakers and the intellectuals, activists, scholars in our countries, they have not yet seen the danger posed by our current imbalance system, by our current system. Yeah, for example, Indonesia recently purchased 15 fighter jets, but who or for what are these jets will be used for? They are not enough to fight the US, certainly, and China, of course. So why are the so-called limited budget by their own perspective used to fund this losing military strategy? For example,
sesungguhnya negara seperti Indonesia harus kembali ke jati dirinya, mengembangkan apa-apa yang menjadi kelebihannya, agraris dan kekayaan alam yang begitu besar. Tetapi semua ini terus-menerus di bawah dikte negara asing dan kebijaksanaannya penuh dengan jejak-jejak yang imperatif dari negara asing.
Indonesia and South Africa and many similar countries are actually rich in natural and human resources, or natural resources and people. But the policies, as you also have shown, seems to be dictated by foreign entities, foreign people, foreign powers. Why? Okay, he has problems, yeah, with his Zoom, but he will continue later when his Zoom is restarting. So buddy, while waiting for him, I guess you can answer a bit and later he can continue, yeah? Please. Buddy?
Yeah. So I was listening very attentively to what he was asking. The question, just to ask the question, the last question that you was, what policies can be put in place?
No. No, why? Why? I have the answer why. I want to show the answer why, but perhaps you can, for example, we know what to do, right? So why does this knowledge not put into practice in your context, for example? I know my context and I will share it later.
I think in the South African context, my experience is that the economists that dictate the policies that we follow are often embedded in the financial sector. That's the one thing. So the financial sector is the sector that benefits from the high interest rates. And what we've seen in South Africa is that the financial sector has grown from 17%, I think it was in 2000, until it's now 23% of GDP. And the productive sector in South Africa has declined a similar amount. So we've declined from, if I recall correctly, it's like 21% of GDP to about 11% or something like that. So what's happened in South Africa over the last 20 years with the policies in place is that the financial sector has actually grown to replace the diminishing productive sector. You know, the banks and the policies that are in place are benefiting these big financial companies that are making a fortune. So that's the one thing. And then the other thing is also the policies that are in place are often driven by these foreign economists and think tanks, and these consultancy companies that are based overseas and things like that. And even local think tanks that are libertarian, paid for by rich companies and stuff. So the policies and the media even in South Africa are, you know, there's this you know, who funds those? So what's happening is that there's this kind of the policies that benefit foreign investors and benefit the local private banks are being pushed a lot in the media, and policies that are going to benefit the poorer people in South Africa and the South African productive sector, which is a competition to the foreign sector, are being they're being underplayed. So I think it's a strategy that makes sense for those sectors, for the finance sector and the foreign sector. I'm just surprised that the local productive sector of South Africa is allowing it to happen, because I would expect that the local productive sector in South Africa would get involved in trying to implement policies that's going to benefit them. But I think they've also been fooled kind of into thinking along those, because there's so much, people don't really think about it too much. They just believe what they're being told. And all these economists and think tanks and stuff are telling them that these policies are going to help you. But meanwhile, what's happening, the evidence has showed that it actually hasn't helped, and the share of production, local production has dropped as a percentage of GDP. The financial sector has increased, and our current account is in deficit just from, profit, interest, and dividends being extracted from South Africa. And so South Africans have to think about how to get to retain that money inside South Africa and build local industries. So so we can grow our local wealth. And I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Thank you. I think he is now connected and he will continue his comments and or question. Please continue, Pak Soebul.
Thank you, Buddy. Saya tambah lagi, adakah cara untuk memulihkan hak-hak dan martabat bagi bangsa-bangsa bekas jajahan yang karena sejarah dia terus-menerus mengalami marginalisasi dan eksploitasi? Gerakan politik apa, suara seperti apa yang perlu dilakukan untuk perbaikan kondisi dunia yang terbelakang dan mendapat perlakuan buruk dari negara-negara besar itu?
I think Pak Soebul, Buddy has identified the problems, and he says that first and foremost, countries such as South Africa and Indonesia needs to identify these problems, build productive capacity, use the creation of the ability to create currency as much as possible to benefit domestic needs. And of course, we need to reduce the amount of resources actually that leave the country. So we need to reduce debts, we need to reduce interest rates, we need to reduce taxes. This is not related to the foreign sector, but taxes needs to be reduced simply to increase productivity among the general masses. Buddy, am I correct?
So one of the things that I talk about, I wrote a blog post on optimizing tax policy, and one of the things that I think that we should really be concentrating on is ensuring that as much of the money that the state spends and the money that the private sector spends in South Africa is retained within South Africa, so that it drives local industry and local incomes up, local profits up, and that's what they call the multiplier. So just keeping the multiplier strong, and less leakages. Leakages from the economy would be spending money on importing goods, services, and investment from overseas. Paying for investment, and the and also savings and interest payments to banks. So that's, you know, back to the central bank. That all takes money back from out of the system, and the tax system should be set up in a way to promote local spending and local investment, you know, investment into local productivity, so yeah, so I write about that. I think it's important that that tax incentivizes the money staying, incentivizes spending within the economy, and there's like South African tax system is very strange because it actually it's reducing demand at a time when demand is already too low, and it's increasing costs for producers at a time when costs are actually what's driving the little inflation that we have. So it's very strange. It's almost like, and it's based on the belief that the state is dependent on the private sector for capital. And so I think that's one of the things that MMT really makes, you know, kind of destroys that myth. And so that's, hopefully our local economists will arrive in the 21st century at some point and actually realize that we're taxing, that the reasons that why we're taxing our companies so much is really it's not even, there's just no reason for it. It's just craziness, basically.
Thank you, buddy. I would like to continue your point by continuing my presentation. I actually prepared a lot more, so I hope I have your permission. Since the other two speakers, Andrés actually is in Pacific time, so now would be around 5 or 6 a.m. in his place. He said that he will join us, but perhaps, you know, he partied late last night or what, you know, it's holiday. So we, MMT, informed people works very hard. So when we have a holiday, we tend to, you know, chill. So I hope he can join us. I have repeatedly texted him, DM'd him, direct message him on Twitter, but he hasn't replied. Anas, the Malaysian MMT advocate, he is preparing for an election in Sabah, yeah? So he said that he might not be able to join us, and it seems that he can't. But anyway, even you or me, either of us, even Pak Sohibul, I think we can feel the whole days, the whole weeks for me even on this topic, yeah? So let me continue this presentation, mine. Can you stop your sharing, screen share, buddy, so I can share mine? I could share mine, but it's best that one person share each time, yeah? We love this elephant, yeah? An elephant never forgets.
And don't forget sharing.
And buddy, please send your presentation later, like last time, so that I can upload it into the YouTube description later. Do it later. Okay, let me share my screen now, yeah? So on that point, okay. So let me close all these other windows first so that this thing's faster. These browsers tends to slow after you open them for a certain amount of time. Yeah? Oh, okay. Nothing happened. But it's just that it's very, very slow. Okay. Okay, never mind. I'll just open the thing. Okay. Bear with me. This laptop is a few years old, perhaps 5 years old. That's why, you know, it's full of stuff, and also more towards the browser Edge. This is Edge. I'm using Edge. Okay. So
I'm not sure if we seem to have lost Surya. I'm sure he'll come back on soon.
I think my laptop was, let me see. There's something wrong with it, yeah? What is this?
I can hear you now, Surya.
Yeah, one moment.
Okay.
Use my
Sorry about that.
Good to have you back.
Yes. This is using my wife's computer. I'm not sure what happened to my laptop because it's frozen. I can't do anything. So let me try. My presentation is there. So let me try whether it's here. Yeah. I have to reopen my presentation. One moment, yeah, it's opening. Okay. Okay. So let me share my screen. Okay. So here we go. Okay. I'm not sure why this is so slow, yeah? We use actually 3 Wi-Fi connections from 3 sources. One local Wi-Fi, 2 from phone's Wi-Fi. So 3 Wi-Fi for each computer, but apparently it's not sufficient. So it's still loading on my screen. Okay, so now you can see that so just now I was saying about constitutional macroeconomics. They are used to implement the constitution. So I would like to explain a bit about the uh, modern monetary theory because I think even the critics hasn't got them all right. Yeah. So I have said that the modern monetary theory is actually a lens, and I would classify, or I would further uh, branch or categorize the lenses into four lenses. One is the lens of capitalism, second, the lens of functional finance, third, the lens of sectoral balance, and fourth, the lens of public purpose. And for the Indonesian context, the public purpose is the constitution, especially Article 27, Clause 2. Yeah, this is the opening of the Indonesian Constitution. It says that we must be sovereign to realize a just and prosperous state. Yeah, and for that, the first or the main sovereignty that we need is monetary sovereignty. So we have here four requirements for monetary sovereignty, which is creating our own money, rupiah, taxing in our own money, borrowing in our own money, and having a floating exchange rate. So the third and fourth is a bit problematic because only 60% of our debt is in our own currency, and sometimes we have, instead of a free floating exchange rate, we have a managed exchange rate. Yeah, so this is what the point that Buddy tried to make. Very last sentence. Yeah, we need to endeavor as much activity, whether especially domestic and foreign, in our own currency. So rupiah in Indonesia and rand in South Africa, but especially domestic, because sometimes you cannot control, or we cannot control what currency I use foreign, yeah, in foreign countries or in terms of international transaction. So a country with monetary sovereignty does not need tax or loan to fund its programs. Yeah, and even a country with limited monetary sovereignty can actually do without tax or loan, because when a country creates its own currency, automatically before tax, the currency must first be created, then that currency is uh, tax. That's the uh, order of uh, process. Yeah, not tax then create, but create then tax. So the most important program in the constitutional macroeconomics for Indonesia is Article 27, Clause 2. Every citizen has the right to a dignified work and livelihood. So I I call it job and basic job and income guarantee. Yeah, and that's it for that one. Now we come to the question of why it is not realized for Indonesia. For South Africa, Buddy has said that the economists or the elites that are ruling the country, they are entrenched in the old belief system, entrenched with the prevailing hegemony, Western hegemony, or European and North American hegemony. But for Indonesia, this is another factor that we need to consider. Yeah. Uh, so here, and then, okay. So why, if our leaders, if our elites have realized the what to do, why they haven't done it all the way. So I'm saying this in the Indonesian context because it seems that given half or more than half of our stimulus are financed by direct monetary creation by the central bank, which is what Buddy has recommended, that half of our stimulus, about 400 trillion rupiah, or 40 to 400 million dollars, I'm not sure of the conversion, uh, uh, we do not finance it by loan, foreign loan. Instead, our central bank, the Bank of Indonesia, purchased about 400 trillion rupiah worth of bonds from the finance ministry. But however, this money creation has policies which are not only recommended by MMT informed scholars, activists, experts, yeah, but policies that only goes half the way. Free employment card, as I have said before. So why? So one of the answers for Indonesia, it seems can be found in terms of the leader of our country, the president, the legislative members, and of course later the judiciary. So I and Pak Sohibul and Afril, we have a suspicion that our election was not conducted freely and fairly. So this is an article I wrote in 2019, and I submitted this to a lot of international media. In essence, we're saying that we are not really sure who really won our elections, yeah? And we think that the election was tampered with. So why is an accurate result of election necessary? Because uh, uh, because we need to determine whether the results of an election accurately reflect the intention of the electors. Of course, you know, the masses know, the public know, the people know what they want, what they need. But if the result of an election does not reflect what they want, what they need, so this is the reason why later the leaders produced by the election does not really implement the policies that are needed, they are wanted by the public, the masses, the people, yeah? And this is an article that I sent to the Washington Post. So I was saying that Indonesia democracy is dying in darkness because all the data needed for the information to verify the election uh, have gone dark or unavailable. Yeah, and this is very worrying. Yeah, we can see there is a recent Jacobin article. Yeah, election in which it seems that the similar case like Indonesia was perpetrated. Yeah, and I'm not going to go into details. Later we can discuss this privately for audience in YouTube later who hear of this serious accusation. So for example, here, Jacobin dissected, the result of the accusation of electoral fraud by the Organization of American States, yeah, against Evo Morales. And they say that it's bullshit. And now we have the data to prove it. So this is very sad because the claim of electoral fraud from the OS comes from supposedly the foremost electoral forensic election forensic scholar. Yeah, here you can see here the statement. Yeah, Irfan, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, here, Irfan Nuruddin. Yeah, so Irfan Nuruddin is alleged to be one of the experts, worldwide experts on electoral forensics. Even though I haven't heard this name before, so our research, the pioneer of electoral forensic is Walter Meban from the US, and Peter Klimek from Vienna, yeah, or working in Vienna. So I think, buddy, what I'm suggesting is also you need to check whether the election in South Africa is conducted fairly and freely, so that may be one reason why the leaders do not, execute, do not implement, do not do what the masses want, what the people want, what activists or economists or scholars or experts such as yourself has recommended. In our case, in Indonesia, all not only for MMT informed people, yeah, all other experts, economists, scholars, scientists from all ideologies, from all perspectives, they have recommended similar policies actually: basic income, job guarantee, focus on health, but the government seems not to hear all of us. Yeah, so that's why I think this is also important to check whether our election is conducted freely and fairly. So I think
Can I interrupt
we
you there?
have come to the end. Yeah, we have come to the end. So you can give. I will give the.
Thanks, Surya. Yeah, I mean, in South Africa, there's not much discussion around whether our elections are free and fair. I think it's kind of assumed by most people that we have free and fair elections. Whether or not that's true, I can't really comment about that because I don't have enough information. But I can tell you that there's been a lot of talk about the funding of parties, political parties in South Africa, which is a major issue, because what it means is that in South Africa, up till now, the funding of parties has been secret. So we've had the situation where political parties aren't disclosing or haven't disclosed who funded them. And even within political parties, there's been campaigns like at the moment in South Africa, there's a movement to get the records exposed of our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, how he became, who funded his campaign to become president within the ANC ruling party. So, and that has been fought by the president, whose lawyers are trying to stop that information from getting out. So what's happening in South Africa is not so much whether the elections are free and fair, but rather there's a discussion about who funds our politicians and our policies, who decides, and how much does that money affect the policies that are put in place. And I think that's a very big issue that needs to be looked at. And yeah, I think that's part of the whole thing, is that there's this hidden flow of money that's happening, that's kind of, and it's based on keeping secrets from people. And that's always going to be a problem. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will give Pak Sohibul the last words, yeah, to end our webinar for today. It's already 9:33 p.m. here in Medan. So Pak Sohibul, from you.
Thank you very much. Saya kira kita sama-sama menyadari ada masalah besar, tapi mungkin bagaimana cara untuk mencari solusi itu jauh lebih pelik. Filosofi di tanah air kami adalah filosofi sapu lidi. Orang-orang lemah bergabung seperti sapu lidi. Kalau hanya satu, cuma bisa mengusir lalat. Tetapi kalau diikat dalam satu ikatan 100 lidi, sampah sebesar gedung pun bisa digeser. Terima kasih atas ceramah dari Pak Buddy Wells. Mudah-mudahan ini terus berkelanjutan. Keep in touch. Terima kasih.
So as I will say, in essence, we now have realized all our weaknesses, whether in our particular countries or between countries or in foreign countries, post-colonialized countries. What is needed now is for us to gather together as a group, as a huge mass, yeah, because there's a philosophy in our country, in Indonesia, which is translated into English, united we stand, divided we fall. So it's not really that. It's that, for example, let's say, one broom can only sweep uh, one fly, but many brooms, it's not really broom, but is sapu lidi. I'm not sure how to translate it in English. Uh, so in essence, with together we can do a lot, but individually we can only do so little. So this webinar is an effort to gather strength within our particular countries, uh, and also with similar, like-minded, well-informed people across post-colonialized countries. And I hope our respective countries can lead the way, can pave the way for true independence, for true sovereignty, monetary, economic, and political, also cultural in the future. Thank you very much, buddy. I think I'm going to organize, I have to organize another webinar with our friends who are absent for today. And we hope to see you later in subsequent webinars. So so he will say, keep in touch. See you. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.